Hi, and welcome to session 3 at 6:40. We're going to be talking about sound design. And when we're talking about sound design, what we're talking about is how we use assessment properly, and how we design the assessment to fit what we want to know and why we want to know it. So the first thing we have to think about is our learning targets, and we want to think about what we're trying to figure out about the students and about their learning. So one of the things that we have this figure here, which represents different ideas. So a knowledge target, we want to know factual information. We want to know if they know the way that the procedures. We want to know if they understand the concepts that we're presenting in the classroom. Reasoning targets, how well are they thinking through the process of what we're teaching them? Still skill targets, are they able to demonstrate what they know? It can be something as simple as a physical skill, like can they do 5 sit-ups? It could be something where they could show us that they're understanding design, where they build a house of cards and the bottom of the house of cards is a larger mass than the top of the card. So we can see if they've learned that. Product targets, where they create an artifact so that we can figure out what we want them to know. So we're finding out that the product is what we're teaching them. So that could be something like if we're teaching them a mathematical concept and we want them to understand how balls go through a turn. That's something where we want to be able to see it ourselves. And a disposition target, how do they feel about what we're teaching? Are they motivated? Are they interested? Are they ready to learn more because of what they've learned in the first series of lessons? So the first thing that we want to do is, once we've figured out how they're going to reason through it, the next thing that we want to figure out is what is the proper form of assessment that's going to work to assess what we want to assess. So if we are looking at a reasoning target where children really have to think through something, a selective response is good because they're able to show that they at least understand the concepts that we're giving them. But it's not as strong as a written response test where we can give them something where they can really think and show us their thinking process behind what they're doing when they're given a prompt to write about. Also, sitting down with the student and being able to have them discuss the way that they're reasoning through the concept is a great way to assess that skill. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're using the proper assessment tool when we're trying to figure out what we're trying to figure out about the student and their learning. So I'm going to leave this up here. You have it in your books as well, but I think this is a really good thing to come back to be able to see what you're assessing and if you're assessing it in the correct way. And this is all about sound design, making sure that what you're assessing well. Now, when you have your assessment cycle, there's a lot of planning that should go into it. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to be taking it through the cycle. The first is the planning stage. You're going to figure out who will be using these results and what are you using them for? Is this a summative assessment? Is this a formative assessment? Will this be guiding your instruction, or will this be determining whether or not they learned the lesson? We're going to figure out what we want to assess and what the learning target is. And I know in the last class we talked about learning targets, so we want to make sure that we're assessing the correct learning targets. We want to make sure that we have the appropriate set assessment methods, which is the last slide that we discussed. And we want to determine if we're going to test this for the entire class, this assessment, or if we're just going to have a select group of children that we're going to use this with. So the next is we're going to start to develop it. We're going to sit down, we're going to write it, we're going to think about what we're going to use in this assessment. we're going to figure out if you're going to have short response tests, what those short responses are going to be. If we're going to do matching, we're going to start putting it together and really start to formulate the assessment. The next is we're going to look at it. We're going to think, does this work? Is this something that I really want to use? Is this going to be meeting all of the things that we had in the planning stages? Is it going to identify are we going to have the learning targets in there? Are we really going to be assessing is the method proper? Does it fit into what I'm doing in class? The next is we are going to use it and we're going to score it. And then we're going to go back and we're going to revise it. So if I did an assessment where all the children were getting true and false, they were wrong. But when I sat down and discussed it with them, they knew what I was trying to assess. There's something wrong with that assessment. So we need to go back and we need to revise it. Assessment should be a constant cycle of revising, updating. And just because it worked in one class doesn't mean it's going to work with another. You need to look at your students. If you have students coming in, especially students with special needs, if you have students coming in who are English language learners, this may work with the full group, it may not work with them. So you need to be flexible in terms of your assessments. For some students, you may also find that it might work well with those quick bubble filling in forms. For other students, they may have an easier time sitting down and discussing it with you. And can you be flexible in terms of your assessment? So one of the things that when you also look at your assessment, you need to think about bias. You need to think about a student who came in who's sick. You need to think about a student who's having problems at home. You need to think about whether or not children are coming in and they really want to go home. It's Halloween, they want to go out and they want to trick or treat. So you really need to think about barriers that will occur with this assessment. And is this one assessment the be all and end all? Can it be done? Can it be done in a different context? This is the next one. Is it loud in the classroom? Is the lighting bad? Did you only have a few minutes before you had to leave? Did someone not have a pencil and the pencil broke? So you need to think about that as well as that impacting what happened in your assessment. One of the big things that I find with beginning assessments are directions. It can be very vague. Are the directions clear enough? And are the directions just trying to be misleading? Are the directions saying circle everything but? There's an assessment that we give sometimes that basically the assessment is whether or not they can read the directions. Is that really testing what we want to test? Are the words clear? Is the layout something that children can look at, that a student can look at and really just be able to concentrate on the answers, or are they confusing? Is there information that's a problem? Was when you copied it, did certain words get cut off the page? So all of this is going to impact your assessment. Assessments need to be clear. They need to be as free from bias as humanly possible. They need to be flexible, and they need to be something that constantly goes through a development cycle and is constantly changed for the class coming in, the children that you have, and even the day. Because what is the basis of assessment? It's not just to put a grade on a piece of paper. The idea of an assessment is to find out what your students are learning or what your students didn't learn, and to either go back, reteach, or find a different way to convey information so that children can be successful. So that is our session 3 lecture. I will keep these slides in your module folder so you can find them. And thank you so much.